The air in the skiff was unnaturally cold. A sterile chill designed to keep the servers humming and the occupants uncomfortably alert. It smelled of industrial-grade coffee and the faint metallic scent of ozone from the electronics lining the walls. For Captain Katarina Valkyrie Volkov, it was just another Tuesday in Afghanistan. She sat perfectly still at the polished briefing table, her flight suit a stark olive drab against the sea of digital camouflage patterns worn by the men around her. They were SEALs, and they carried themselves with the quiet, coiled lethality of apex predators. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Cerberus Thorne, sat directly across from her. His jaw was a hard line. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, assessed her with an unnerving mixture of professional curiosity and innate skepticism. He didn't know her, and in his world the unknown was a liability. Katarina was used to it. As one of the few female A-10 pilots in the theater, she had long ago learned that respect was not given. It was forged in the crucible of competence, often against the friction of doubt. She kept her gaze fixed on the projection screen, her posture a study in disciplined neutrality. The briefing officer, a colonel with a weary face, clicked to the final slide. It detailed the target, a high-value individual, Dr. R.S. Thorne, a chemist with knowledge of a next-generation nerve agent. The mission, codenamed Operation Cyclone's Eye, was straightforward on paper: infiltrate a remote mountain stronghold, rescue the scientist, and exfiltrate. A classic snatch and grab. Insertion will be via halo jump for Trident Team. The colonel droned his voice flat. Air support and real-time tactical oversight will be provided by a single A-10 call sign, Valkyrie 1. Heads turned. A single asset for a mission this critical. Murmurs rippled through the SEALs. Thorne's expression didn't change, but a muscle feathered in his cheek. The colonel cleared his throat, sensing the shift in the room. Now for the most critical aspect of this operation. Due to the target's high volatility and the unique intelligence landscape, Cyclone's Eye will be executed under a special rule of engagement. He paused for effect. On the screen, a new paragraph appeared in bold red letters. Special RO 7 Alpha. In the event of conflicting tactical assessments between ground and air assets, the pilot of call sign Valkyrie 1 is designated Tactical Command Authority. Her directives will be considered final and are to be executed without delay. This authority supersedes that of the ground force commander. Silence. It was a cold, profound silence that sucked all the air from the room. Katarina felt every eye lock onto her. It was no longer skepticism she saw in their faces, but outright disbelief, bordering on hostility. She had just been handed command of the most elite special operations unit on the planet from the cockpit of an aircraft flying 10,000 feet above them. Thorne slowly leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Katarina's. He didn't speak to the colonel. He spoke directly to her, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Colonel, am I to understand that my team men with a decade of boots-on-the-ground experience are to subordinate their tactical judgment to a pilot? Before the colonel could answer, Katarina met Thorne's stare. Her own voice, when it came, was devoid of emotion, as cold and precise as the air in the room. That is what the order says, Commander. The colonel hastily interjected. This directive comes from the very top, Commander Thorne. It is non-negotiable. The briefing concluded moments later, but the tension remained thick and suffocating. As the room emptied, leaving only the primary operators, Katarina stood to leave. Captain Thorne's voice stopped her. She turned to face him. He had closed the distance between them, and up close, his physical presence was formidable. He was a man built of muscle and resolve, and his eyes held the weight of countless battles. I've never seen an ROE like that. He said, his tone carefully neutral. I don't know who you are or what strings you pulled to get that kind of authority, but let me be clear. My job is to bring my men home. All of them. If your orders get in the way of that, we're going to have a problem." Katarina looked at him, seeing not just the arrogance of an elite warrior, but the fierce protective instinct of a leader. She understood it better than he knew. "My objective is the same as yours, Commander," she replied, her voice unwavering. "To ensure Trident Team completes its mission and returns to base. My orders will not get in the way of that. They will guarantee it." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the skiff, the heavy door hissing shut behind her, leaving Marcus Thorne standing in the cold silence, the absurd, impossible order echoing in his mind. The battle for Operation Cyclone's Eye had already begun, not in the mountains with the enemy, but right here in the space of distrust between the sky and the ground. Marcus Thorne watched her walk away, her posture ramrod straight, a solitary figure moving with unnerving composure through a world of controlled chaos. The heavy skiff door sealed behind her, with a pneumatic sigh leaving him in the lingering chill. His men glanced at him, their expressions mirroring his own disbelief. He gave a curt shake of his head, a silent order to stand down, and then moved. He found her on the flight line where the Afghan sun beat down with a merciless intensity, bleaching the color from the concrete and raising shimmering waves of heat from the tarmac. The air was alive, with the distant guttural roar of a C-17 taking off, and the constant whine of generators. It was her element, a domain of jet fuel, roaring engines, and open sky. She was standing near a hangar speaking quietly with a crew chief who was checking a pylon on the wing of an A-10. Her A-10, the Warthog. It was an ugly, brutally functional aircraft built around a cannon that fired shells the size of milk bottles. It had no sleek lines, no pretension of elegance. It was like its pilot all business. As Marcus approached, the crew chief noticed him, nodded respectfully, and made himself scarce. Katarina turned her face partially obscured by the shadow of the massive wing. She showed no surprise at his presence. "Captain," he began, stopping a respectful distance away. He kept his voice even, stripping it of the anger he felt. This wasn't a dressing down. It was a professional inquiry. "I need to understand this, ROE. My team's lives will depend on it." "I believe the colonel made it quite clear, Commander," she replied. Her gaze was steady, her eyes the color of a winter sky. He clarified what the order asterisk is. Asterisk? He didn't explain asterisk, why asterisk, it exists. Marcus countered, taking a small step closer. "I have led SEALs on over 100 missions. We trust our CAS pilots to be our eyes, our hammer. We trust them with our lives. But that trust is built on a clear understanding of roles. You provide support. I command the men on the ground. This protocol upends that. It puts you in charge of tactical decisions you can't possibly have the context for." He gestured vaguely toward the ground. "You see heat signatures on a screen. I see the terrain. I hear the ricochets. I smell the cordite. I know when my men are reaching their breaking point." That's a reality you can't get from 10,000 feet. For the first time, a flicker of something passed through her eyes. Not anger, not frustration, but something deeper, more weary. It was gone in an instant. She knew he wasn't entirely wrong. He was just missing the one piece of the puzzle that made him entirely wrong. The piece she couldn't give him. The ghosts of Kilo 7 whispered in her memory, a stark reminder of what happened when the ground commander's context was a perfectly laid trap, visible only from above. "You're right," she said, the admission so unexpected it momentarily silenced him. "I don't have your context, but you don't have mine either. My perspective is different, not better, different. In this specific mission, Command has decided that my perspective takes precedence. And you have no issue with that. taking responsibility for men you've never even trained with. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable now. This was the crux of it. The test. He wanted her to flinch, to show doubt, to admit the absurdity of the situation. He wanted a partner, not an overseer. But she couldn't give him that. The protocol wasn't born from a desire for power. It was forged from failure and blood, and its authority had to be absolute to work. Katarina took a slow breath, the scent of hot metal and asphalt filling her lungs. My only issue, Commander, is mission success and bringing everyone home, the same as you. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the oppressive heat. I did not write the rules. I am required to follow them. And so are you. It was a dismissal, a clinical, dispassionate wall of military regulation. There was no room for argument, no space for an appeal to logic or experience. She had taken his valid concerns and filed them away under irrelevant. The turning point was a quiet one, a final closing of a door he had been trying to pry open. Frustration, cold and sharp, coiled in his gut. He had come seeking a soldier's understanding and had received a bureaucrat's reply. He saw now that he would get no further. He gave a single sharp nod. Oh, sharp. Understood, Captain. He turned and walked away, the sound of his boots crunching on the loose gravel of the flight line. The divide between them was no longer just a matter of protocol. It was a chasm of philosophy, of experience, of trust. And as he walked back toward the world, he understood the world of dirt, sweat, and blood. He made a silent vow. He would follow her orders, but he would watch her every move, ready to reclaim command the instant her perspective from the sky led his men into danger on the ground. Night had fallen over the air base, trading the oppressive heat for a deceptive desert chill. The roar of engines had subsided to a low, distant hum, and the sky was a vast canopy of brilliant cold stars. While most of the base slept, Katarina was wide awake, her boots echoing softly on the concrete as she approached her aircraft. The Warthog sat under the harsh glare of floodlights, a hulking, angular beast at rest. Her ground crew had already completed their work, and now it was her turn. The pre-flight check was a ritual, an intimate communion between pilot and machine. She ran a gloved hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool, riveted skin of the aircraft. This was not just a machine to her. It was a sanctuary, an extension of her own will. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, the familiar scent of hydraulic fluid, worn leather, and electronics enveloping her. The titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit gave a sense of immense security, a feeling she knew was partly an illusion. Flipping a series of switches, she brought the cockpit to life. Instrument panels glowed with a soft green light, the heads-up display casting faint reflections on the canopy. Her hands moved with an economy born of 1,000 repetitions, dancing across the controls, checking flaps, testing the oxygen system, waking the beast from its slumber. Her fingers brushed against the dual throttles, and her thumb instinctively found a small crescent-shaped dent in the metal just below the weapons control panel. It wasn't battle damage. It was from her. From a day 2 years ago, when her fist, in a moment of unspeakable rage and grief, had slammed down on this exact spot. The memory rose unbidden, as sharp and clear as the day it was forged. Operation Kilo 7, a recon team of 4 Rangers pinned down in a narrow valley. Her A-10 was their only eye in the sky, their only hope. Her infrared display had shown her the truth the Rangers couldn't see. The small enemy force engaging them was just bait. The ridges on both sides of the valley were teeming with dozens of heat signatures, an overwhelming force poised to spring the trap. Jaguar command. This is Valkyrie. Her own voice echoed in her memory, tight with urgency. The Ranger element is walking into a catastrophic ambush. I have eyes on at least 30 enemy combatants in fortified positions above them. Recommend immediate withdrawal and danger close fire mission on the eastern ridge." The reply had come from a major sitting comfortably in a command center 100 miles away. A man looking at a drone feed that didn't have her angle. Negative, Valkyrie. Intel shows only a small insurgent cell. The Rangers are cleared to engage and destroy. Maintain your orbit. Do not, I repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. She had argued, her voice rising in disbelief. But she was a captain, and he was a major. The chain of command was absolute. She obeyed. She was forced to circle helplessly above a silent god, watching a tragedy she had the power to prevent. She watched as the trap was sprung. She heard the desperate final radio calls from the valley floor get cut off one by one, replaced by the triumphant shouts of the enemy. She had followed her orders. And 4 men died. Back in the present, her thumb traced the smooth, cold edge of the dent. That failure had hollowed something out inside her, but it had filled the void with something harder. It was the reason she hadn't flinched when the colonel revealed the special ROE. It was why she had met Commander Thorne's challenge with a wall of ice. He saw arrogance. She knew it was atonement. He saw a pilot hungry for command. She knew it was the crushing weight of a responsibility she would never again entrust to a voice on a radio miles from the fight. She would not let another Kilo 7 happen, not on her watch. She would wear the suspicion of Thorne and his men like armor. She would accept their distrust because she knew a truth they didn't, that her cold, detached authority, the very thing they resented, was the only thing that might keep them alive. The ghosts of the Rangers from that valley demanded nothing less. Her check was complete. Every system was green. The GAU-8 Avenger was loaded. The Maverick missiles were slave to her systems, and the fuel tanks were full. The machine was ready. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes for a single moment, the faces of the fallen Rangers flashing behind her eyelids. Then she opened them, and they were gone, replaced by the steady, calm green glow of the hood. The past was a ghost, but the future was a mission. And she was ready for it. The command came precisely at 0100 hours. A clipped impersonal voice over the encrypted network. Cyclone's eye is green. Execute, execute, execute. The pre-mission stillness of the airbase shattered. On the flight line, the twin turbofan engines of Katarina's A-10 spooled up with a rising, hungry shriek that tore through the night. Inside the cockpit, she was sealed in her world of green, glowing data. With a final confirmation from the tower, she pushed the throttles forward. The heavily armed Warthog, laden with fuel and munitions, surged down the runway, a behemoth defying gravity. It lifted into the blackness with a grunt of raw power, its navigation lights blinking once, before she switched to tactical blackout mode, vanishing into the Afghan sky. Miles away at the helicopter pads, the rotors of 2 MH-60 Blackhawks beat a rhythmic percussive tattoo against the air. Strapped into the cramped cabin of the lead chopper call sign, Nightfall 1. Marcus Thorne, conducted a final gear check, his movements economical and precise. Around him, his men did the same, their faces intermittently lit by the dim red interior lights. They were a silent brotherhood, communicating through practiced gestures and glances. The tension was a familiar presence, a coiled spring of readiness. Trident laid, "This is Valkyrie 1." Katarina's voice, filtered through the helmet's comm system, was a calm, steady presence. "I am airborne and proceeding to Waypoint Alpha. Awaiting your status." "Roger, Valkyrie." Marcus replied, his own voice a low baritone. "Nightfall is wheels up in 2. The Blackhawks lifted off their flight path, taking them low and fast toward the jagged peaks of the Toba Kakar range. The first 20 minutes were routine. Katarina maintained a high orbit, her advanced sensor suite mapping the terrain below, while the helicopters hugged the contours of the Earth. Then the mission's first complication arrived. The weather forecast, to be clear, turned hostile. A dense, wet bank of clouds rolled in from the north, blanketing the mountains in a thick shroud. It swallowed the moonlight, and stars plunging the world into an impenetrable darkness. For Katarina, it was like a curtain being drawn. Her visual and infrared sensors suddenly useless, replaced by the digital mush of impenetrable moisture. "Valkyrie, be advised, we are losing visibility." Marcus reported, his voice tight. "Cloud ceiling is dropping fast. We can't see the peaks." "Confirmed Trident lead." "My sensors are compromised." Katarina's reply was clipped. The current conditions render high-altitude oversight ineffective. This was a critical problem. The mission's entire command structure, the very reason for the controversial ROE, depended on her ability to see what they could not. Now she was blind, separated from them by thousands of feet of turbulent cloud. The standard procedure was to climb above the weather and rely on radar and instruments, a significant handicap that would negate her tactical advantage. Inside the Black Hawk, Marcus felt a grim sense of vindication. Here it was. The first real test, and the much-vaunted eye in the sky was neutralized. They were on their own. Then his comms crackled. "Trident led. This is Valkyrie. Standard orbit is not an option. I'm going underneath." Before Marcus could process the statement, let alone question it, her intent became terrifyingly clear. He peered through the cockpit window of the Black Hawk, his night vision goggles amplifying the ghostly gray landscape. For a moment there was nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the cloud ceiling below them. The A-10. It plunged through the vaporous curtain, a gray specter against the darker gray of the mountains, its wings seeming to skim the jagged ridgelines. Katarina had taken her 10-ton attack jet into the canyons, flying a dangerous high-stakes game of terrain, following at night in bad weather. It was a maneuver that belonged in air shows, not combat zones. A feat of extraordinary skill and nerve that left zero margin for error. One miscalculation, one sudden gust of wind, and she would become a fireball against the side of a mountain. Inside his vibrating helicopter, Marcus was stunned into silence. He and his men were the ones known for calculated risks, for pushing the boundaries of the possible. But what he was witnessing was on another level. This wasn't arrogance. This was pure, unadulterated flying skill, wielded in service of the mission, in service of them. A calm, unwavering voice filled his headset, cutting through the static and the roar of the helicopter's rotors. "Valkyrie is on station low level. I have eyes on your route. Valley is clear for the next 5 clicks. Proceed as planned." She had passed her first test, not of command, but of competence. And for the first time since he'd read that impossible order sent, Marcus Thorne felt a sliver of something other than doubt. It was a reluctant, grudging respect. The Blackhawks never touched the ground. They hovered 20 feet above a rocky plateau, their rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and loose scree. One by one, the seals fast roped down into the maelstrom, their dark forms moving with fluid efficiency. Marcus was the last one down. The moment his boots hit the earth, the ropes were released, and the helicopters banked hard, their sound fading rapidly into the oppressive silence of the mountains. They were alone. Marcus scanned their surroundings through the ghostly green filter of his night vision goggles. They were in a world of sharp, monochromatic shadows. The air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp rock. Using a series of precise hand signals, he set his team into a security perimeter, then began their trek toward the target, a dark silhouette 5 kilometers distant. They moved like wraiths, their only sounds the soft crunch of their boots on gravel and their own controlled breathing. Above them, unseen and unheard, Katarina's A-10 carved a lazy, silent orbit. From her cockpit, the 12 seals were distinct green blobs on her thermal imaging display, moving with purpose through the cold landscape. Her job was to watch the path ahead to see the dangers they couldn't. An hour into the ingress, the first danger appeared. "Valkyrie, I have movement," Marcus whispered into his mic, his team instantly freezing in place, melting into the rocks and scrub brush. 5, maybe 6 individuals, armed, moving along the ridge to our northeast. They haven't spotted us. Katarina's fingers danced across her controls, slewing the sniper pod's camera onto the coordinates. The image zoomed in, resolving into the clear thermal outlines of a 6-man patrol. They were exactly where Marcus said, moving carelessly, their path set to intersect with the SEAL's planned route. Marcus's tactical mind raced. The patrol was an unknown variable. Standard procedure was to eliminate the threat quickly and silently before it could raise an alarm. His 2 snipers were already inching into better firing positions, awaiting his command. It was a clean, simple solution. He was about to give the signal when Katarina's voice cut through his ear, sharp and imperative. "Trident lead, hold your fire. I say again, go weapons tight. Do not engage." The order was a physical jolt. It went against every instinct he possessed. Leaving an enemy patrol to wander freely on their flank was tactical suicide. "Valkyrie, they are on a direct intercept course. If they spot us, this entire operation is compromised," he hissed back, his voice low and urgent. "Negative, Cerberus." She used his call sign, her tone leaving no room for debate. "The patrol is bait. My sensors are picking up 8 more signatures. Static dug into the rocks 200 meters beyond them. It's a classic L-shaped ambush. The patrol is the lure designed to draw your fire and fix your position." On her screen, the picture was chillingly clear. The 6 men of the patrol were bright moving heat sources, but beyond them, barely distinguishable from the cold rocks, were the fainter, stiller outlines of prone bodies waiting patiently. They were invisible to the naked eye, even with night vision. Only her sophisticated thermal sensors could spot the subtle temperature difference. Marcus was frozen in a moment of critical decision. His eyes told him one thing. His experience screamed at him to act. But her voice, the voice he was ordered to obey, was telling him a different story. It was the ultimate test of the Ghost Protocol. Kilo 7 flashed through Katarina's mind. This was its mirror image. This time, she would not be silent. "Go to ground now," she commanded, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Melt into the shadows. Let them pass. On my authority." The last 3 words were the key. She was taking full responsibility. Cursing under his breath, Marcus gave the hand signal. All around him, his men flattened themselves against the cold earth, becoming one with the terrain. The next 5 minutes were an eternity. The patrol ambled past their position less than 70 meters away. One of the men stopped to light a cigarette, the brief flare of the match a terrifying beacon in the darkness. The SEALs remained as still as the stones around them, their breathing shallow, their hearts pounding in the enforced silence. Finally, the patrol moved on, disappearing over the ridge, oblivious. The hidden ambush force never stirred. The immediate danger had passed. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He raised his head slightly, scanning the now empty ridge. She had been right. An engagement would have been a disaster. They would have been caught in a deadly crossfire, their mission over, before it had even begun. He keyed his mic, the sound of his own breathing harsh in his ears. "Solid copy, Valkyrie. It wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a concession, a quiet admission of trust earned in the crucible of a life-or-death decision. They were still miles from their objective, but the dynamic between the ground and the sky had fundamentally changed. They reached the perimeter fence just before 0300 hours. It was a 12-foot chain-link fence topped with concertina wire, enclosing a sterile, gravel-strewn no-man's land. The target building, a squat, windowless block of brutalist concrete, sat in the center like a tomb. The silence here was different. It was an artificial, watchful quiet. "Whisper, what do you see?" Marcus murmured, his voice barely audible. The team's tech specialist was already prone, a portable spectrum analyzer in his hands. He scanned the compound for several long moments, his face grim in the green glow of the screen. "It's lit up like a Christmas tree, boss," Whisper reported. Intel said basic motion sensors and a few fixed cameras. They were wrong. This is a multi-layered, overlapping grid. High-res thermal microwave and seismic sensors. We can't even cut the fence without tripping half a dozen alarms. Marcus processed the information, his mind sifting through options and finding none. A physical bypass was impossible. That left an electronic one. "Valkyrie, you copy that?" "Loud and clear, Trident lid." Katarina's voice replied instantly. She had been listening to their private channel, her display already showing the faint electromagnetic haze emanating from the compound. "The intel package is worthless. Stand by, I have a solution." The plan she laid out was audacious. Her A-10 was equipped with an ALQ-131 electronic countermeasures pod, primarily used for deceiving enemy radar and missiles. But it could also be configured to emit a powerful focused blast of broadband electronic noise, a digital sledgehammer. The idea was to fly a precise low-altitude pass and direct that beam at the compound's security hub, temporarily blinding every sensor and camera on the network. The resulting window of opportunity would be vanishingly small. "I can give you 30 seconds of total system blindness," she explained, her voice all business. "Once I initiate the pulse, you cut the fence and make for the north wall of the main building. There should be a censored dead zone in its immediate shadow. You have to be inside that zone before the 30 seconds are up. Acknowledge." "We acknowledge," Marcus confirmed, the risk settling heavily in his gut. 30 seconds was an impossibly tight margin. "Give us the signal." Katarina banked the Warthog, lining up for the attack run. "Commencing my run. Clock starts on my mark. Stand by." She keyed the sequence into her weapons control computer, programming the ECM pod. But as her finger moved to the activation switch, a yellow warning light flashed on her console, accompanied by a low, insistent beep. SBOS fault timing processor. The automated system that would perfectly calculate and execute the pulse at the optimal moment was offline. There was no time to run diagnostics. No time to reconsider. The team was exposed, waiting. "Trident led, be advised, I have a system malfunction," she announced, her voice betraying not a hint of the adrenaline that shot through her. "My automated timer is down. I'm executing a manual pulse. It's going to be on my eyeball. Get ready." On the ground, Marcus's blood ran cold. Eyeballing it was a phrase no soldier ever wanted to hear when their life depended on millisecond timing. He looked at his men, their faces tense and ready. He had no choice but to trust her. In the cockpit, Katarina's world narrowed to the green symbology of the heads-up display. The compound was rushing toward her. She was a surgeon, and the ECM pod was her scalpel. Her mind became a biological computer, calculating speed, distance, angle, and signal lag. Her thumb rested on the activation button on her throttle. 10 seconds, she said aloud, more to herself than to them. The rangefinder on her HUD ticked down rapidly. 5, 4, 3, 2, stand by. Her eyes were fixed on the precise spot where the main security antenna was located. Mark. Her thumb depressed the button. On the ground, the SEALs didn't wait for confirmation. The instant her word came through, bolt cutters bit into the chain-link fence. They moved with a desperate, synchronized grace, a blur of dark shapes pouring through the gap, sprinting across the gravel field that had become a 30-second ticking clock. In the sky, Katarina pulled her jet up hard, the G-forces pressing her into her seat, the world outside a swirl of darkness. She had done her part. The rest was up to them. 28 seconds after her mark, the last SEAL pressed himself flat against the cold, rough concrete of the north wall. A moment later, they heard the soft hum of the compound's electronics re-engaging. They had made it with barely 2 seconds to spare. Marcus took a moment to control his breathing, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. He looked at the intact fence now, an impassable barrier once more, and then up into the empty night sky where she was circling invisible. He keyed his mic, his voice low and steady. "Good work, Valkyrie." The reply was just as simple. "Get ready for the next one, Commander. You're in." With a muffled asterisk thump, asterisk from a breaching chart, a heavy steel door blew inwards, and the SEALs flowed into the compound. The air inside was cold and smelled of antiseptic and damp concrete. They found themselves in a long, featureless corridor lit by emergency lights that cast long, distorted shadows. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft scuff of their boots and the faint hiss of the building's ventilation. According to the schematics they had spent days memorizing, their route was simple. Take the first right proceed down the main concourse for 200 meters, and the lab complex would be on their left. Marcus led the team forward, his rifle at the ready. They reached the intersection. Where there should have been a right turn, there was only a seamless, solid concrete wall. He stopped the team with a curt hand signal. They doubled back, trying a different corridor. It ended in another dead end. After 10 minutes of fruitless searching, the grim reality became clear. "Valkyrie, this is Trident, lead." Marcus's voice was a low growl of frustration over the comms. "The blueprints are a bust. The internal layout doesn't match anything we have. We're in the blind." He wasn't just reporting a problem. He was asking for a solution. He was placing his team's fate entirely in her hands. High above, Katarina was already working the problem. The building's roof, while thick, was not entirely opaque to her state-of-the-art thermal sensors. It was like looking through frosted glass, but she could still discern major structural elements, and more importantly, heat signatures. Her role instantly shifted from Overwatch to Navigator. "Roger that, Trident. Stay put. I'm switching to thermal navigation," she replied. Her view of the world changed from a high-resolution grayscale image to a shifting map of oranges, reds, and blues. "I can't see the architecture, but I can see the heat. I'm your new floor plan, trust me." The mission transformed into a tense claustrophobic crawl through an enemy maze guided only by a disembodied voice from the sky. Katarina became their Virgil in this concrete inferno. "Okay, Cerberus, backtrack 10 meters. There's a door on your left you missed. It leads to a parallel corridor. Take it." The team obeyed, finding the almost hidden door exactly where she said. "Proceed 200 meters. You're approaching a major intersection. I'm tracking 2 stationary heat signatures in the room to your right. Looks like a barracks. Hold position. They're not moving. We bypass." They moved through the labyrinthine structure, a silent dance choreographed by a pilot miles above. The trust between Marcus and Katarina was no longer a question. It was the only thing keeping the mission alive. He had ceded his authority not because an order told him to, but because her competence demanded it. They were moving down a long, straight hallway that seemed to promise clear passage, when her voice suddenly sharpened with urgency. "Cerberus, stop now. The team froze mid-stride. "The wall on your left, about 30 meters ahead. My thermal is showing a temperature variance," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "It's faint, but it's warmer than the surrounding concrete. It looks like a prefabricated panel, not a load-bearing wall. I think it's an ambush point," Marcus signaled to whisper. The tech specialist cautiously approached, pulling a fiber-optic snake cam from his pack. He slipped it under a crack in a door frame further down the hall, angling it toward the suspicious wall. On his wrist-mounted display, the image was clear, an empty corridor. Then he angled it toward the wall Katarina had indicated. The image resolved into a narrow vertical slit cut into the concrete, and behind it, the unmistakable glint of a machine gun barrel. A cold dread washed over Marcus. They had been seconds away from walking into a perfectly prepared kill zone. "Solid copy, Valkyrie. Moving to find an alternate route." Under her guidance, they backtracked and navigated a series of service tunnels bypassing the trap. Less than 5 minutes later, she identified a second similar thermal anomaly, another hidden ambush nest, positioned to cover their most likely secondary approach. They had avoided 2 lethal traps they never would have seen coming. The skill it took to spot such a faint detail was incredible. But the relief was soured by a chilling realization. These ambushes weren't just clever. They were prescient. They were placed exactly where a highly trained Spec Ops team would be forced to go based on the false blueprints they had been given. The bait patrol, the faulty intel, the maze-like interior, the perfectly positioned kill zones, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Marcus keyed his mic, his voice low and grave, voicing the thought that now haunted all of them. "Valkyrie, it's not just a trap. It's like they knew we were coming." The weight of Marcus's words, "It's like they knew we were coming," hung in the comms channel. A chilling verdict. They did. Katarina's voice came back devoid of any surprise. "The entire facility is designed as a kill box. The false blueprints, the ambush points, they weren't just defending this place. They were shaping the battlefield for an intruder they fully expected. The mission's parameters had evaporated. This was no longer a rescue operation. It was a fight for survival. But retreat was not an option. They were too deep inside, and the path behind them was likely already being sealed. The only way out was forward. "We proceed to the objective," Marcus ordered his team, his voice a low, hard command. "But this is now a recon in force. We are drawing the enemy out. Eyes open. Valkyrie, you are our lifeline." "I'm with you, Trident," she affirmed. As they pushed deeper toward the central core identified on their faulty maps as the main laboratory, the compound came alive. The feigned silence was replaced by the cacophony of battle. Steel doors burst open. Muzzle flashes strobed in the long corridors, turning the darkness into a deadly light show. The enemy fighters were disciplined, well-armed, and numerous. The SEALs responded with a lethal efficiency. They were renowned for cutting down threats with controlled bursts of fire. But something was wrong with the enemy's tactics. Their fire, while heavy, seemed less aimed at annihilating the team and more at controlling their movement. A fusillade from the left would force them to seek cover on the right. An attack from behind would push them forward. They were being herded. "They're not trying to pin us," Marcus yelled over the gunfire, the realization dawning on him. "They're funneling us, forcing us down this main corridor." He was right. Every other route was being systematically cut off by overwhelming fire, leaving only one path open, a wide, straight hallway designated B7 on the schematics. It felt horribly exposed. A shooting gallery. They were being pushed into the very heart of the kill zone. The pressure was immense, pinning them down at the entrance to the hall, concrete chipping away around them as bullets sparked off the walls. "Valkyrie, we are pinned," Marcus shouted into his mic, the desperation clear in his voice. "They're forcing us into hallway B7. We need fire support on the roof directly above the far end of the hall. Now." It was an insane request. A strafing run on the very building they occupied. "Roger, Cerberus. This is going to be close." Katarina's voice was strained with focus. "Pop IR smoke at your position so I can mark friendlies. I'm coming in hot." Danger close is an understatement. In the sky, the A-10 stopped its lazy orbit and nosed over into a steep, terrifying dive. The world outside Katarina's canopy became a rushing blur of dark earth. Her target was a small section of the roof above hallway B7, an area she'd noted earlier had thinner reinforcement and a series of large ventilation grates. Through the vents, she saw the faint ghostly bloom of the SEAL's infrared grenade. That was her mark. Her thumb moved to the trigger on her flight stick. On the ground, the SEALs hugged the floor, pressing themselves into the concrete. They heard it before they felt it, a sound that started as a low whine and grew exponentially into a demonic scream, as if the air itself was being torn apart. Then came the roar. Asterisk, Bart, asterisk. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke. For 2 hellish seconds, the universe was filled with its fury. From Katarina's cockpit, it was a deafening, bone-jarring vibration that shook the entire airframe. For the men on the ground, it was the apocalypse. A storm of 30 mm high-explosive incendiary shells fired at 65 rounds per second, ripped through the roof at the far end of the corridor. Concrete steel rebar and enemy fighters were pulverized in a singular cataclysmic event. The shockwave washed over the SEALs, and the air filled with the dust of pulverized cement and the acrid smell of cordite. The enemy fire ceased instantly. In the ringing silence that followed, Marcus pushed himself up his ears, humming. The far end of the corridor was a smoking, mangled ruin. They were alive. He looked at the carnage, then down the length of the pristine, untouched shooting gallery they were being herded into. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone what had been waiting for them at the other end. A machine gun nest, a claymore mine, an explosive trap. He keyed his mic, his voice hoarse. "Valkyrie, it's a trap." He wasn't telling her something new. He was confirming her worldview. This whole place is the kill zone. His trust was no longer a matter of protocol or respect. It was absolute. She was the only reason they were still breathing. The dust from the cannon strike slowly began to settle, revealing a scene of utter devastation at the end of the hall. In the ringing silence, Marcus looked at the path they were being forced down, then back at the mangled wreckage. He keyed his mic, his voice raspy. "What's our move, Valkyrie? Your call." The question was a complete abdication of his own command, a total transfer of authority born not of regulation, but of hard-won faith. In the cockpit, Katarina felt the immense weight of his trust. It was heavier than any order she had ever received. Protocol demanded she report the compromised nature of the mission to forward command before making any unilateral decisions. It was a formality, but a necessary one. "Stand by, Cerberus. I'm updating Jaguar Command," she said. She switched frequencies, opening a secure satellite link to the task force headquarters hundreds of miles away. The connection was crystal clear. A calm, sterile voice patching her through to the watch commander, a colonel whose voice she recognized from briefings. She laid out the situation with cold, efficient precision. "Jaguar Command, this is Valkyrie 1. Be advised, Operation Cyclone's eye is compromised. All initial intelligence is false. The target location is a multi-layered prepared kill box. I assess with high confidence the enemy had foreknowledge of our operational plan. The mission as briefed is no longer viable. I am officially recommending immediate abort and extraction of Trident Team. There was a pause on the other end, filled with a faint crackle of encrypted data. The Colonel's reply when it came was laced with impatience and steel. Negative, Valkyrie. Your on-scene assessment is noted. However, there are strategic assets in play that you are not privy to. The objective will be secured. Your recommendation to abort is denied. Your new orders are to support Trident Team as they push to the objective. Acknowledge, Captain. The word Captain was stressed just enough to be a reminder of her rank, a subtle check on her authority. Katarina felt a cold dread seep into her bones. It was the same tone, the same dismissive certainty she had heard 2 years ago. A distant commander looking at a map and moving pieces on a board, blind to the reality on the ground. The ghosts of Kilo 7 unscreamed in her ears. She looked at her tactical display at the 12 green icons of Trident Team huddled at the entrance to a slaughterhouse. She looked at the dent on her throttle quadrant. Asterisk, never again. In that moment, a decision was forged. It was a choice between her career and their lives. It wasn't a choice at all. Her hand moved with deliberate calm. She reached over and terminated the satellite link, plunging her cockpit into tactical silence. She took one deep, steadying breath, then switched her comms back to the SEAL's frequency. Her voice when she spoke was a masterpiece of control. There was no hint of the treason she had just committed. Cerberus, I've lost the satellite link to Jaguar Command. She said the lie smooth and plausible. The signal is gone. Could be atmospheric interference, could be enemy jamming. Either way, we're on our own. She let the implications of that sink in. No support, no higher authority, just them. Then she delivered the final irrevocable order. From this point forward, my orders are the only orders. The original mission is scrubbed. The target is irrelevant. Our new and sole objective is the survival and extraction of Trident Team. Acknowledge. On the ground, Marcus heard her transmission. He didn't know she was lying, but he didn't need to. He had heard the tone in Command's voice before, too. He knew what kind of orders came from men who couldn't see the battlefield. Katarina's lie was the truth he wanted to hear. Her command was the only one that mattered. He trusted the pilot in the sky far more than the colonels on the ground. He keyed his mic, his voice firm, unwavering. Solid copy, Valkyrie. We read you 5 by 5. A pause. Lead the way. High above the mountains of Afghanistan, in the solitary confinement of her cockpit, Captain Katarina Volkov had just gone rogue. She had taken 12 of America's most elite soldiers with her, severing them from the chain of command, and placed the full weight of their lives and the consequences of her actions squarely on her own shoulders. The fight had devolved into a desperate close-quarters brawl for survival. The enemy, no longer content to herd them, was now pressing the attack intent on annihilation. Marcus and his team had been forced back into a cross-junction of corridors, the position where her earlier cannon strike had mangled the ceiling. It was their only defensible ground, but it had turned into a death trap. Enemy fire rained down from unseen positions on the roof above, pinning them, chewing up their cover. Nico's hit, someone yelled. Doc, get to Nico. Marcus saw 2 of his men down wounded, but alive, being dragged into the relative safety of an alcove. They were being picked apart. The weight of command pressed down on him, suffocating him. His training, his experience, his instincts all screamed one solution. Eliminate the primary threat. He had to take out the shooters on the roof. He keyed his mic, his voice strained by the thunderous noise of the firefight. "Valkyrie, this is Cerberus. We have 2 men down, pinned in corridor B7. Enemy fire is overwhelming from 3 directions, requesting immediate air support on the western rooftop coordinates. Sent, I say again, requesting airstrike now." The words so familiar from the opening moments of their story were now imbued with the full weight of their shared ordeal. This was not a commander asking for support. It was a man asking his last and only hope to save his people. In the serene detachment of her cockpit, Katarina saw the battle with terrifying clarity. She saw the muzzle flashes from the rooftop positions pinning his team. But her thermal imager showed her more. As she focused on the roof, her blood ran cold. The enemy fighters were there, yes, but their heat signatures were scattered. Between them, laid out in a subtle, sinister grid, were faint, perfectly square patterns of residual heat. They weren't hot enough to be electronics, but they were warmer than the surrounding concrete. Wires, pressure plates. The men on the roof weren't just shooters. They were human triggers. The entire structure was a deadfall trap designed to collapse inward, and Marcus was asking her to light the fuse. "Negative, Cerberus," she replied, her voice a calm, solid rock in the storm of his reality. The hiss of her oxygen mask was a soft counterpoint to the violence below. "I repeat, negative on the airstrike. Your orders pull back immediately to secondary extraction point, Charlie. Now." The order was so counterintuitive, it bordered on madness. "Pull back!" Marcus yelled into the mic, disbelief warring with the trust she had earned. "Valkyrie, the objective is 50 meters from here." Command wanted. He caught himself the habit of old protocols dying hard. "Command doesn't have my view." Katarina cut him off her hand, tightening on the flight stick as she banked the A-10, keeping her sensors locked on the trap. "That rooftop isn't a sniper's nest. It's wired with pressure plates. The entire section is rigged to collapse. You're being baited into a grave. My order is final. Withdraw." 3 seconds of silence stretched across the comms channel. 3 seconds in which the universe seemed to hold its breath. Around Marcus, bullets sparked and ricocheted. One of his men grunted as a piece of shrapnel tore into his leg. The tactical logic was simple: stay and die, or advance and die. But she was offering a third option, an impossible option that required one last absolute leap of faith. He looked at the faces of his remaining men, their eyes wide and desperate, looking to him for the call. He thought of Kilo 7 of the men who died, because their leader trusted the wrong voice. "He would not make that mistake." "Copy, Valkyrie." The words were ground out, a testament to his ultimate choice. He turned to his men, his voice a roar that cut through the chaos. "You heard her. Pair Warthog's command. Pull back, move." As his team began the difficult, dangerous work of a fighting withdrawal, grabbing their wounded and laying down suppressing fire, Katarina banked her jet. She watched the 12 small green heat signatures begin to move away from the center of the trap, separating themselves from the death that had been so carefully prepared for them. The voice from the sky had spoken, and the men on the ground had listened. The retreat was a brutal inch-by-inch battle. The SEALs moved backward in a disciplined formation, dragging their wounded, laying down a steady rhythm of suppressive fire. Every corridor they had cleared on the way in was now a contested kill zone. The enemy, realizing their prey was escaping, fought with a renewed ferocity. Katarina's voice was their only guide, a steady compass in the swirling chaos, directing them toward a service tunnel that led to the outside. "Emergency exit is 100 meters ahead on your right," she guided them, almost there. Just as the forward element of the team reached the tunnel's entrance, a deafening explosion ripped through the foundation of the building. The world shook violently. The emergency lights flickered once, then died, plunging the corridor into absolute disorienting darkness, save for the green glow of their NVGs. The way ahead was gone, replaced by a solid wall of collapsed concrete and twisted steel. "Valkyrie, the route is gone!" Marcus yelled into his mic over the ringing in his ears. "They've blocked it! We're trapped!" Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to take hold. They were deep inside a collapsing structure with no obvious way out. But Katarina's voice cut through the fear as focused as ever. "Negative. You are not trapped. Stand by Cerberus." Her thermal sensors were already probing the structure, searching for a flaw, a weakness. "I see an exterior wall to your north. Structural scans show it's unreinforced, thinner than the rest. I'm going to make you a new door." Marcus knew what she meant. "How much ordnance do you have left?" "One Maverick," she replied. "An AGM-65 air-to-ground missile? A tank killer. Gross overkill for a breaching operation, and phenomenally dangerous to use this close to friendly forces. Get your men to the far side of the corridor. South wall. Hug it tight. Backblast will be significant. Let me know when you're set." After a tense 20 seconds, Marcus gave the confirmation. "Trident is set." "Roger, missile is away," she said. They felt the impact more than they heard it. A deep, resonant thump that vibrated through the soles of their boots and up into their chests. The entire north wall of the corridor seemed to bulge inwards before disintegrating into a cloud of dust and rubble. Where the wall had been, there was now a gaping, jagged hole, revealing the cold, starlit night sky. They had an exit. But as the first SEALs scrambled you through the breach, they were met by a hail of gunfire. Enemy forces outside had converged on their position. They were pinned down again, horribly exposed in the breach. Katarina's voice came over the radio tighter than before. A red fuel warning light was now blinking insistently on her console. "Cerberus, I'm bingo on ordnance and low on fuel. I have one weapon left." Marcus knew instantly, the plane itself. "I'm going to draw their fire." She stated not a suggestion, but a fact. "It'll be a low-pass, high-speed. It will get loud. When you hear me, you run for extraction point, Charlie. Do not stop. Go." She pushed the A-10's nose down, accelerating toward the compound. Dropping below the ridgeline, she flew at treetop level, pushing the throttles to their stops. The Warthog screamed over the battlefield, the deafening soul-shaking roar of its twin engines designed to do one thing: inspire terror and draw attention. It worked. As Marcus and his team scrambled out of the breach, every enemy gunner on the ground instinctively turned their weapons towards the massive threatening jet. The night sky was suddenly filled with the red and green lines of tracer fire, all arcing toward Katarina. Marcus, providing cover fire for his men, watched in horror as the A-10 became the sole focus of the enemy's rage. He saw the bright flashes of multiple rounds striking the aircraft's famously durable airframe. A 23 mm shell found its mark, shredding the cowling of the right engine. A plume of thick black smoke began to trail from the wounded jet. It shuddered visibly in the air, but Katarina held her course, completing the pass before pulling the struggling aircraft up and over the nearest ridge, disappearing from sight. The diversion had cost the SEALs precious seconds. It was enough. They laid down a final volley of covering fire and sprinted for the rocky outcropping that served as their emergency extraction point. They had made it. They were out. But the radio was silent. Marcus stared at the empty patch of sky where she had vanished, the trail of black smoke hanging in the air like a fading question mark. The SEALs secured the rocky outcropping that was their emergency extraction point, forming a tight defensive perimeter. The adrenaline from the escape began to fade, replaced by the grim realities of their situation, the sharp tang of antiseptic as their medic worked on the wounded, the low groans of pain, and an all-consuming silence from the sky. Marcus was on the radio, his knuckles white where he gripped the handset. The wind whistled through the rocks, mocking the dead air in his ear. "Valkyrie 1, this is Trident Lead. How copy over?" Only static answered. "Valkyrie, what is your status report?" The silence was a physical weight pressing down on the entire team. They were men of action, and this enforced helplessness was a unique form of torture. Every eye was turned toward the ridge where she had disappeared. "Still nothing, boss," his comm specialist said, looking up from his own radio. "I've put the CSR team on alert." "Valkyrie 1, this is Trident Lead. Kat talked to me." Marcus transmitted the use of her first name, a raw plea slipping through his professional veneer. More static. A full minute passed. Then 2. In the world of combat operations, it was an eternity. "Boss Nightjar." "Actual is on the line," the comm specialist said. "CSR is ready to launch, but they need the airspace cleared. We have to declare her down to get the birds in the air for our own extraction." Marcus's jaw tightened. Declaring her down meant she was gone. It meant giving up hope. "Negative," he grated. "She's not down. Not until we see a fireball. Hold them off." He knew he was delaying the inevitable, delaying their own rescue. But he couldn't bring himself to say the words. He owed her more than that. He replayed the last moments in his mind, the A-10 absorbing the punishment meant for them. The trail of black smoke, the defiant climb. The Warthog was tough a flying tank. But nothing could survive that kind of fire forever. Another minute crawled by. The medic finished patching up the last of the wounded. The wind died down, and the silence became even more profound. The hope that had buoyed them was beginning to curdle into a grim resignation. Marcus was about to give the fatal order to clear the sky for their own ride home. Then, a faint crackle broke the static. A whisper of a sound, almost indistinguishable from the background, hiss. "Dent, id? This is Valkyrie." Marcus's head snapped up. He pressed the handset so hard against his ear it hurt. "Valkyrie, say again. I read you broken and faint. Say again, over." An agonizing pause stretched, and then the voice returned distorted and weak but unmistakable. It was strained with immense effort, each word a battle against pain and a failing machine. "Copy, Trident, Valkyrie is still airborne." A collective, silent exhalation swept through the team. The tension that had held them rigid for agonizing minutes vanished in a rush of profound relief. "Starboard engine is out," her voice continued, gaining a fraction of strength. "Multiple hydraulic failures. Electrical is spotty, but I'm flying her home on my own." Marcus leaned his head back against the cold rock, closing his eyes for a moment. He could hear the whine of a single overburdened engine in her transmission, the shriek of protesting metal. She was up there in the dark, fighting a desperate battle to keep a crippled monster in the sky. All for them. He raised the handset to his lips, his own voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Solid copy, Valkyrie." He said the words feeling utterly inadequate. "We'll see you at the barn." As the distant, rhythmic asterisk whump, whump, whump asterisk of the inbound Blackhawks finally reached them, Marcus looked up at the stars. They were going home. And so was she. 48 hours later, the adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind only exhaustion and the cold certainty of consequence. Katarina and Marcus stood at attention in the same sterile refrigerated skiff where their mission had begun. The mood, however, had shifted from one of tense preparation to one of stark judgment. Seated at the head of the long table was Colonel Hayes, the theater commander, whose voice had condemned them to press on. His face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. Flanking him were two other senior officers, their expressions unreadable slates of military impartiality. This was not a debriefing. It was an inquisition. Katarina's A-10, riddled with cannon shell impacts, and missing an engine, sat crippled in a maintenance hangar, a silent, damning piece of evidence against her. Captain Volkov, Colonel Hayes, began, his voice devoid of any warmth. You stand here today to account for a series of catastrophic failures. You willfully disobeyed a direct lawful order from a superior officer, a flagrant violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You unilaterally aborted a mission of strategic importance. And in doing so, you caused severe damage to a $20 million combat asset. The mission was an unmitigated disaster. Katarina stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the wall behind him. She had replayed this moment in her mind 100 times in the cockpit of her dying jet. She knew the price of her decision, and she was prepared to pay it. And you, Commander Thorne Hayes, continued, his gaze shifting to Marcus. Your own judgment is called into serious question. You allowed your command to be usurped following the illicit orders of a junior officer in direct contravention of established military doctrine. Marcus's expression remained like granite. He did not flinch. Captain Volkov Hayes said, his focus returning to her. Do you have anything to say in your defense before I make my official recommendation for court-martial? Katarina took a breath, ready to give her simple, factual account and accept her fate. But before she could speak, Marcus took one step forward. Colonel, with all due respect, Sir Marcus's voice was a low, powerful rumble that commanded the room's attention. Captain Volkov's statement is incomplete without the ground truth. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Commander, you are not the one being questioned. I'm making myself part of the testimony, Sir Marcus replied, his tone unwavering. He placed a small, hardened data slate on the polished table. I have here the complete, unedited tactical recordings from every member of Trident team, synced with Captain Volkov's cockpit audio from the moment of insertion to the moment of extraction. He activated the slate. A holographic display shimmered to life above the table. The sterile room was suddenly filled with the chaotic, terrifying reality of the battle. He showed them the footage of the bait patrol and the hidden ambush she had identified. He played the audio of her calm voice guiding them through the maze and the snake cam footage of the machine gun nest hidden behind the false wall. He let the footage play until it reached the critical moment, the brutal firefight in corridor B7. The raw desperation in his own voice calling for an airstrike. And then Katarina's calm refusal. The holographic display showed her A-10 sensor feed the sinister grid of pressure plates on the roof, glowing faintly, a truth invisible to the men below. Finally, he played the damning exchange. The audio of Colonel Hayes's voice from the command center asterisk. The objective will be secured. That's a direct order, Captain. Asterisk. It was followed by the recording of Katarina's lie to him, the feigned loss of signal, her declaration that their new mission was survival. When the recording ended, a profound silence filled the room. The sterile black and white certainty of the charges had been shattered by the messy, violent, undeniable truth. Marcus stood at rigid attention. Colonel Captain Volkov was presented with an impossible choice. Follow a flawed order that would have resulted in the loss of my entire team, or take command and save our lives. She made the only choice a true leader could make. She disobeyed your order to uphold her duty to the men on the ground. If a crime was committed here, sir, the fault is mine for ceding command. I will accept the consequences. He had become her shield. The man who had once been the source of her greatest professional friction was now, in her moment of judgment, her staunchest and most unexpected defender. The silence in the skiff was absolute, thick with the unsaid challenge Marcus had thrown down. Colonel Hayes's face was flushed with anger, his authority undermined by the irrefutable video evidence. He opened his mouth, likely to charge them both with insubordination, when a soft, insistent beep emanated from the secure comms unit at the center of the table. It was a priority channel, one that rarely rang. An aide answered it, his eyes widening slightly as he listened. He held the receiver out to Hayes. "Sir, it's General Vance." The name landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. General David Vance was a 4-star general at SOCOM, a legendary figure who operated in the stratosphere of military command. His unexpected intervention instantly vaporized Hayes' authority. The main screen at the end of the room flickered to life, revealing the stern, deeply lined face of the general. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in the scene. "Colonel Hayes, report." Hayes, visibly flustered, gave a clipped, biased summary of the events, ending with his recommendation for a court-martial. General Vance listened patiently, his expression unchanging. When Hayes finished, the general was silent for a moment. "Commander Thorne, play the tactical recording," Vance commanded. Marcus complied. The general watched the key moments: the ambush detection, the manual ECM pulse, the danger close fire mission, and the final desperate call from Hayes without a word. When the recording finished, he looked not at Hayes, but directly into the camera, his gaze seeming to lock with Katarina's and Marcus's. "Colonel, your assessment is flawed," Vance said, his voice like cold steel. "You were operating on the same faulty intelligence that led to the Kilo 7 disaster 2 years ago." He let that sink in. "Captain Volkov, Commander Thorne, what you were sent into was not a rescue mission. It was a test." A quiet gasp came from one of the aides. Hayes looked utterly bewildered. "The enemy faction, their methodology, their trap design, it was all identical to Kilo 7. The general continued, his voice low and grave. "The Ghost protocol you operated under was an experimental countermeasure. We had to know if a single, empowered tactical commander with a comprehensive aerial view could prevent a repeat of that tragedy. The intelligence was deliberately left in its flawed state." He paused. "For the record, Doctor, Thorne was confirmed deceased 3 weeks ago. The rescue was a pretext. The truth was devastating. They hadn't been soldiers on a mission. They had been variables in a brutal, high-stakes experiment. Their lives had been the currency of a hard lesson learned." General Vance's eyes then shifted, his gaze boring into Colonel Hayes. "The official record, however, will state something different." His voice took on a formal, declarative tone. "Operation Cyclone's Eye was tragically compromised by unforeseen and catastrophic intelligence failures. A full review of the intelligence pipeline that produced this faulty data will be launched immediately." He then turned his attention back to Katarina, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "However, due to the exceptional airmanship and sound independent judgment of Captain Katarina Volkov, the lives of 12 Special Operations Forces were preserved. Her decision to abort, while contrary to her standing orders, was unequivocally the correct one. She upheld the highest priority of any officer she brought her people home. All charges are to be dropped. A formal commendation for her actions will be entered into her classified service record, effective immediately." With a final, meaningful look at Katarina and Marcus, the general's image vanished and the screen went black. The silence that returned was different. It was the silence of a truth spoken and then immediately buried. Katarina stood at attention, the verdict washing over her. She was free, vindicated, but it was a victory no one outside this room would ever know. The commendation was a secret. The real story of her choice, the lie she told, the burden she shouldered, all of it, would be locked away in a classified file, a ghost in the machine. She had won. But her heroism would be silent, her honor a thing known only to her and to the men whose lives she had saved. A week later, The late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the flight line, bathing the airbase in a warm, golden light. The frantic energy of combat and the cold tension of the Inquisition had given way to the steady, familiar rhythm of military life. Katarina stood beside her A-10. The Warthog was whole again. A new engine had been fitted, and the damaged systems were repaired, but if you looked closely, you could still see the faint, silvery outlines of patched bullet holes along the fuselage and right wing. Subtle scars that told a story the official reports never would. She heard the crunch of boots on gravel and turned to see Marcus approaching. He was alone, dressed not in combat gear, but in simple fatigues. He stopped beside her, and for a long moment they both just looked at the formidable aircraft. "She looks tough," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "She did her job," Katarina replied simply. "We're rotating out tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "Heading stateside for a few weeks. The wounded are all stable. Everyone's going home." There was an ocean of unsaid words between them. He didn't say asterisk, "Thank you, asterisk." The phrase was too small, too hollow to contain the gratitude he and his men felt. It couldn't possibly cover the weight of her choices, the career she had risked, the life she had fought to save for them. "The official record is a lie," he said instead, his eyes meeting hers. "But my team knows the truth. We know who to thank." He reached up to the sleeve of his uniform and with a distinct rip of Velcro, pulled off his unit patch. It was the golden trident of the Navy SEALs, an icon of courage and lethality, recognized the world over. He held it out to her. "The men wanted you to have this," he said. His voice was low and sincere. "They said the eye in the sky should have a trident." Katarina looked at the patch in his hand, then back at his face. This was her commendation. Not the classified, sanitized citation locked away in a file, but this. A tangible piece of honor, freely given by the men who were there. She accepted it, her fingers closing around the rough, embroidered fabric. "If you ever need eyes on the ground," Valkyrie, Marcus said, his gaze unwavering. "No matter where, no matter when, you call us, we'll be there." It was the ultimate pledge. A promise of loyalty that superseded any official chain of command. It was the ghost protocols reforged in the fires of combat and reborn as a bond of unbreakable trust. "Copy that, Cerberus," she whispered the words, catching in her throat. He gave her a single sharp nod of farewell, turned and walked away, his silhouette shrinking against the setting sun. Katarina stood alone on the flight line as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep hues of purple and orange. She opened her hand and looked at the trident. It wasn't a medal to be polished and displayed. It was a silent truth, a quiet honor. It was enough. She looked from the patch in her hand to the scarred metal of her jet, and then up to the vast, peaceful expanse of the evening sky. Or her sky. She was not a hero whose name would be sung, but a guardian whose presence was felt. And in the quiet dignity of her silent duty, she had finally found her peace. This story was crafted to explore a truth, often lost in the thunder of battle, that the greatest acts of heroism are frequently silent. They are the difficult, lonely decisions made without applause, the burdens carried in the quiet of a cockpit or the heart of a commander, and the integrity that holds firm when the only witness is one's own conscience. It is a narrative about the fierce, unspoken trust forged between warriors, a bond that ultimately transcends protocol and rank. The journey of Katarina and Marcus is a testament to the idea that true strength isn't about giving orders, but about earning the right to be heard, and that the most profound victories are those that save lives, not just win objectives. If these explorations of quiet courage and the complex weight of command resonate with you, we invite you to subscribe to the channel. By doing so, You ensure you won't miss our future narratives as we continue to shine a light on the unseen heroes who define the very essence of honor. Thank you for joining us on this flight.